then that is a document that'll take you totally into, they will never charge you with another crime. They will not be able to. They can charge you with a tort action. That's when you hurt someone else, but they cannot charge you with a commercial crime. And so this thing is coming down to the point. Now, what are they going to do if they declare martial law? I can't tell you. I don't care. I can't do a thing about it. All I can do is try to help where we are now. And I think the Republic of Texas is going to have a lot to say about whether they're going to do it in Texas or not. And so we will see. Someone came on the internet this week and they said, is George Bush really the president of the United States? He's a citizen of Texas. Texas is a republic. How did they ever count in the election? And if he's a citizen of the Republic of Texas, how can he be in their system? And so it was pretty interesting to think along those lines. But and I'm not saying I'm against George Bush or for him one way or the other. I could care less. Those people, all of them are the same to me. They're out to no good, and they're out to just hurt people. And it never has. And I went to Korea. I'm not there. I went to there, and but it was teaching me. How in the world do you fight a war for peace? I mean, that has never made sense to me. Why you go out and kill 50 million people and say that you're fighting for peace? Why don't you sit down at the table and say, hey, let's work this out? It's no use killing everybody. But we don't want to do that because there's ulterior motives in all this. The ulterior motive in this nation, though, was to enslave the people so that they could use the wealth of the country to do all of this other stuff they've been doing all over the world. That's where the wealth came from. When the wealth got to the point that people were really starting to enjoy what they were working for, they did what with it? They moved all the factories out of the country. And the wealth of a country is the factories that are in the country. So when they moved them out, it destroyed the wealth of the United States. And so since then, we've been just living on a borrowed time, and it's if you don't talk to as many people as I do, the economy is not good, and people are losing their jobs. We had a man his boss called him in yesterday. He had no clue. He said, the boss called him in, and he said, I don't want you coming in anymore. I can't pay you, and I don't want you wasting your gas because we just don't have the money. Kmart went out of business. Kmart owed us a bunch of money. Now we're not going to get the money from Kmart. So this is starting to happen, and so but this is their plan, is to take the United States and bring us into line with the rest of the world, to where everybody are slaves, everybody is getting just enough to eat. And this is where it's going. But while we're here, I fight them until that time. In other words, until somebody shoots me or does something. But until then, that's what we have to do. We have to stand here, and you have to stand your ground. I tell people that when you're doing all of this, go into it. And if you're going into court, or if you're going and you're talking to someone else, you should never listen to what they're saying. If you listen to what they say, they will deceive you into. I think Ed was telling me about his grandson. He had this thing all planned. He went into court, and so the first plan worked. The judge says, "Come in here, come in this bar," and he said, "I ain't going nowhere." And so then the district attorney stood up and he said, "If you don't get in this bar, I'm going to put out a warrant for your arrest right now." And he lost. He forgot everything else he was going to say. Totally went into fear and went into there. You see, at that point, all he had to say is, "You're fired." See, and we forget because we start listening to what they have to say. People are always calling me and saying, "Let me read you this paper." I said, "I don't care what it says. Why do you care what they say if you're going to accept it and return it to them? There's one word that destroys everything they do. No, true. Everything in this document is true, and I'm going to return it to you. Why is that? Why does that work? No controversy whatsoever. The attorney does not have anything to prosecute for, and the judge has nothing to rule on because there was no prosecution. And this literally worked in a federal court. The guy went in, he was getting him for willful failure to file. He walked in that court and he says, Judge, before we get started, I'd like to make a statement. The judge says, okay. And he said, Judge, I'm going to accept case number so-and-so, which was number his case, and I'm going to accept it in its entirety, everything in it. And he said, all of it is true. I haven't filed in 30 years, but I'm going to return this case to you for closure and discharge in this matter. And he said the court went totally quiet. Nobody could say a word. And the judge finally said, well, I guess we'll have to postpone this. And they have never come back to him. When you admit something is totally true, what controversy do they have to try and charge you with? See, you may be charged with something when you go in there, but that's not what you're going to be tried on. You're going to be tried on what you say, what information you give them. This is all they can use against you. What you put in interrogatories, what you put in depositions, and all those papers that they get you to fill out. That's all they can try you on, because it's first-hand knowledge. And so they work off of that, and then they start asking you questions. And like little magpies, I want to get on the stand, I want to tell my story. And then you get their guy on the stand, and they say, okay, what were you doing on the night? I don't remember. Well, what about this? I can't recall that. And that's what they do to us, and we get up there and tell them everything. And they don't believe a word of it, because everything you said created a controversy. You see what they do to us, it's the easiest thing in the world to get us to try and defend ourselves. How many of you can look in the mirror actually and defend yourself that you never did this, and this? I don't think of one. I know I can't. I try to think of some things sometimes that I've never done, and I can't think of it, And so, and I quit trying to think about that, because it says, bam, boy, you're a bad guy. But in reality, that's the way of all of us. But we have this propensity to try to tell people that we're really not a bad guy. We're really not a bad woman. We're just, and we push behind us. And I remember my mother. I got to go eat lunch with her every day for the last 5 years. She was here. And I never will forget, she came to me one time, and I used to talk to her, and she said, son, I don't do that, son. I don't do it, And she come to me one time, she said, I looked in that mirror today, and I saw the worst looking person I'd ever seen in my life. She had finally come to the realization she could say, she was had done all these things in her life. And that's the way we do. So get it out of your mind to try to defend yourself. When you tell them it's all true, they have nothing they can try you for. It's all true. If they want to question you, sure, it's all true. I think that this document is the thing that I believe you can give to a policeman. Because he is making a legal determination for you out on the highway. And I think you can give it to him and tell him. And he's the one that's going to have to deal with it. I think he'll have to call in. But I think that's where it is the fact that you've got to declare yourself as competent to handle your affairs. And at the Republic meeting last night, one of the ladies came that hadn't been in a long time. she got telling about her daughter. And she said, I never did think my daughter was listening to me and all this stuff. And she said, her and this other girl were attending, they were at being homeschooled. And so one day, whichever mother was there had to go do something for a minute, and they decided they'd get out and walk down to the store. They're about 16 years old. Walk down to the little 7-Eleven down there and get them a Coke or something. And they're walking down the sidewalk, and this policeman pulls up the curb. Says, what are you girls doing out of school? And the one little girl starts stuttering, and this other one said, I don't think that's any of your business. And the guy said, what's your name? And so she went over and she pointed at his badge, and she said, it might be Jeff Smith. And boy, he covered it up, and he says, how old are you? She says, I'm 16. He said, well, what are you doing out of school? She said, I told you that's none of your business. And he said, get in this car. And she said, no, sir, I'm not getting in your car. I don't get in car with strangers. She said, I'm walking home. And he said, how old you say you were? She said, I've already told you once. If you can't remember, that's your problem. And said she turned around and just walked home. The other little girl got scared, and she got in the car. Guess what she got? A ticket for being out of school. And they gave her a ticket. This other little girl didn't get anything. They even never got her name. And so they always, it's called bribery. If you'll do this, we'll do this. If you don't shut up, I'm going to find you in contempt. That's a bribe. Everybody considers it a threat, but it's a bribe. They're simply trying to get your permission to do to you what they want to do. So, all of this about the bond is to free you from having your assets taken away from you. If you don't, you're going to end up like most people are now. They're going to end up in the dog's house is going to look good to them because they're really coming down hard on people. They had a lady from Colorado call me, and we'd been working on a foreclosure. And so she said, we got a letter. She had just had a huge cancer taken out of her, and so she said, we got this letter, and the mortgage company we sent that bond to said they sold the mortgage to another mortgage company. And the other mortgage company says they're going to come take the house. But they told us, they said, but if you'll move out by June the 1st, we'll give you a $1,000 check. And I said, what is that telling you? They're trying to bribe you to get out because they cannot take the house otherwise. They just sold it to another mortgage company. They thought they would scare you. Don't ever back down once you do it. You stand your ground because the last guy standing is going to win. And I've told you about the little girl in San Antonio that she actually was the only person I ever knew that owned her house and owned the land the house was sitting on, because she had done the UCC-1 where she had taken the land back from the governor. So she owned her land, and then the bill of exchange we had done, we had put it into to the state Secretary of State, and then sent the bill of exchange in. And so she didn't know it at that time, and I didn't know until later. But they had discharged that bill of exchange July the 1st. July the 1st, they came to her and said, they sent the seven dwarfs, sent them a letter and said that they were going to take her house. Now, this had been going on for about 2 years, and they hadn't got it yet. They'd been in the court 3 or 4 times and never got it. And so anyway, they said the bank came then, and the bank said, tell you what we'll do. We'll let your sister buy this house, and we'll okay her to buy it if you will release that UCC-1 lien on that land. And she did it. And then she called me and told me she did it, and I said, you just lost your house. Well, when they closed the deal, September the 10th, September the 11th, she got in the mail the original promissory note paid in full July the 1st, 2002. So she actually owned that house and the land, but they could not allow that. I mean, that's what they thought. If she had known, if she had called me and told me, I could have told her, don't you ever give that up. And but she didn't do it, and so she lost the land and the house. Her sister, of course, is making payments on it now, but that's where it all is. There's about 10 people living in the house, and they were afraid that they were going to take the house. Well, they've been there 2 years, been fighting that thing, and now all of a sudden they're scared they're going to take the house. And why that gets into people's mind, I don't have any idea. But the essence of all of this is that you and I are the rulers of this country. We the people, whether you're in Texas, whether you're in the United States, we the people are the rulers. It is, they have convinced us that we're incompetent to take care of our affairs. So I'm telling you now, you are competent, and being competent, whatever you say goes. You fire anyone that comes within an inch of you. You just tell them you're fired, or I'm revoking your power of attorney to represent me. As I told you, the man in Houston in court, four of them hauled him back to the judge's chambers, 4 deputies. He hadn't fired them yet. The bailiff wouldn't touch him. And they actually got the bailiff and made him get on the stand and testify to the fact that they had fired everybody in that courtroom. And he did it. And so when he went in that room, those 4 bailiffs started jumping on him, you know, not hitting him or anything, but just haranguing at him. And he looked at all 4 of them and he said, all 4 of y'all are fired. And 3 of them immediately left the room. The 4th one went, he said, as far in the other corner as he could get, and just stood there. And finally his wife ordered the judge, you go tell him let my husband go. So they took the handcuffs off and he came out, and they literally took the court over simply by telling them equality under the law is paramount. You understand what that means? That means that anything they tell you to do, they have to do. If they tell you got to take a competency test, you got to go see a head shrink, that means they have to go see a head shrink. And so what you do to them is equality under the law is paramount. Now, I'm competent to handle my affairs. Where are you coming from? You're not going to get a chance because I find you incompetent. You're a fiction, and I declare that you don't exist, and you're fired. We used to do it with a negative averment. It's basically saying the same thing. It's just doing it in a different way. It's putting it where it should, and that is, excuse me. But it's basically putting it exactly where it is, and that is that everything dealing with us is mental health. This is what it's all about. They deem all of us as nuts until we stand up and say we're not. But it all has to do with mental health, and this man that really has gotten into this, when he called, that's what he dealt with those people with, and they realized that he knew what he was talking about. And so that one man got on the phone and said, I'm going to tell you a lot of things. I'm not going to tell you my name, but I'm going to relate to you what all has gone on and kind of what has caused the DA to do what he did. And he told him all of the sordid details of what has gone on with that. His name is Dupree. Huh? Mike Dupree. And so when he did it, then the district attorney has sent the charges back to him now. But it had all to do with, now see, this constable, they couldn't arrest him at that point because it's hard to arrest a constable. I don't know if you know, he can arrest the sheriff, but it's hard to get somebody who can arrest him. I'm not sure it's not the Texas Rangers or who it has to come in and arrest him, but it's hard for anyone to arrest him. But they put the charges, and they're going to throw the charges back to him. So that's where, you know, if there wasn't people along the way, and there's a lot of people that shed blood all along the way about all of this, that causes things to happen and causes us to start understanding why this happens. Why do they do this? That's why I always used to watch. I never go into the statutes, because in listening to Eustace Mullins, who had been in the court more than anyone, he sued everybody that breathed. Anyone that would sneeze at him, he'd sue them, because he said it kept them from doing anything to him. But in his book, he listed all the cases and told what happened and all this other. But at the end, he said, you know, I went into court all these years, 30 years. He said, I never won one case. I come to the conclusion that is not my court. And I should have never gone in there to begin with. But he did. But he learned, see, by going in there. And when he said that at the end of his book, and I used to talk to him when he'd come down here, in my mind it just solidified that's not my court. Why do I want to go into that court? So at that point, everything to me was, what is causing this to happen? Why is this going this way? And by asking questions rather than trying to study these rabbit trails which were going out here, I let the fast greyhounds go after those rabbit trails. And they spent all their time in their books studying them and all that. And it all did help, because one piece of information would come over here, one would come over here, and then I was sitting there saying, why is this happening? And then all of a sudden said, well, this is the reason it's happening. And so it all started coming together. And then when we started getting into the redemption part, then I realized that this was more than just something man, that we had gone into Egypt, the proverbial Egypt, and we were now going to come out. And the ones that want to hear and ones that want to listen will come out because they're free. Every human on this earth, I don't care what he believes in, who he believes in, whether it's Baal or who, whatever God he thinks he believes in, every human is born with freedom. And his freedom was bought. All man's freedom is here. It's whether or not they want to take hold of it. And so in doing this, if a person is free, you have to start thinking like a free man. And a free man does not go and harm another man. He don't go over there and pick a fight with his neighbor. He tries to live in peace with him. And so if the more you come to freedom, the less you want to criticize and be condemning of other people. And this is just the way it is. But the more laws you think you got, this got quite interesting on the radio yesterday. This thing came up, and I had wondered all these years. I've been on that show about 3 years, and all of a sudden the man says, well, I just don't believe that people ought to be able to go out, and they did those debts, and I think they ought to have to pay them. And they're just getting out and causing everybody else. And I said, but you can't. I said, you have to help people where they are. You can't go in. I told him, I said, I never ask a man when he calls me, are you guilty of what they're saying? That's not my business. All I'm saying, he came to me and asked me for help, and whatever I can do to help him, I'm going to help him. And that's what it's all about. It's your freedom. Once you start internalizing in yourself that you're free, and I don't care what anyone says or does. You can look them straight in the eye and you say, no, sir, I'm free. Who are you that you can take my freedom from me? Nobody was put here to take anyone else's freedom. And this is what this is all about, is your freedom. And so we've come to the thing now of being able to deal. What we were having the hardest time with was these courts. And then all of a sudden it dawned on us these courts were in chambers. And this came, from people, I don't know if they researched it, it just all of a sudden came to them, but they put it in there and said, and that's where it all is. And sure enough, that's exactly where it all is. And then all this started coming together. Then since 1973, there hadn't been a court. There hadn't been a court open since 1973. They can't open a court There's no innocent plea for the defendant to be able to plead to. And if there's no innocent plea, then all you've got is a summary judgment going into that court, and that's a dog and pony show they're putting on to just put people in jail. How can a defendant lose 99.5% of the time? You mean they're so brilliant that they have all the evidence? No, they pick people up who've done nothing, just walking down the street and pick them up and charge them with a crime. And this man told us, he said, they charged me with this crime. And he said, well, I didn't do it. I wasn't even there. And they said, we don't care. If you don't plead, we got 10 other charges we want you to plead guilty to. If you'll plead guilty to those, we'll let you off for 2 years suspended sentence. He said, well, I didn't do anything. They said, you're going to get 20 years on this charge. So finally he said, okay. He took the 10 charges plus that. They gave him a 2-year suspended sentence. They wanted to get rid of those 10 charges. So if you don't think that all that stuff is contrived down there and it's simply no one is that good that they win 99.5% of the time. The reason they win, and they had to close the court down. They had to close it to the point that the district attorney would never lose, and this is what we found out. If he loses, then you can sue him. See, that's the common law aspect of someone making charges against you. If you lose, you've made false charges against somebody else, you can be sued. And so they know it, and you will win. You will win their bond. You'll take their bond. And this is what's going to happen with Emmett, is he's going to take that man's bond, and then he makes about, I think, $93,000 a year, and so he will send him a bill, and then he will place him into bankruptcy and take everything he has, if that's what Emmett wants to do. But this is what it's all about, and we've come to the point now that you can actually defend yourself. Before, you had no defense. You just, it's either that or get you an attorney. And everybody knows you get an attorney and you got a good chance of winning. You're going to walk out there, possibly. or is that a sure way to jail? It's just as sure as you can ever pick. Because really, you can't really blame the defense attorney. He has no way of winning, so he goes and makes the best deal he can for you. They tell him, well, we could give him 40 years. Well, would you give him just 10? I'll go offer him 10. And so he comes back and says, hey, I got you 10 years. That's a good deal. But I didn't do anything. That's the best I can get for you. If you go to trial, I'm going to tell you, see, they got so many cases now. There's so many things that they went to this plea bargaining because of the system they have. They were charging more and more and more and more people with crimes because there's well over 60 million codes, rules, and regulations. And so they can pick anybody all they want to, and so the more crimes they got, the richer the lawyers got, and the poorer the people are getting. If you'll notice, who owns all the big deals downtown? All those big tall buildings. Who's in those buildings? Attorneys. Who goes out into the neighborhood and has a $3 and $4 million home sitting out in these neighborhoods? The lawyers. And football players and basketball players. and I have nothing against them. At least they go out and work. They have to sweat and run up and down the court and hit people and all that other stuff. So, but attorneys do nothing. They literally do nothing. A lot of them get rich off of the insurance companies. You've seen that ad, Longacre or whatever his name, Longcard. We'll get you every penny that you have coming to you. I mean, isn't this silly? I mean, but all of this stuff, it's where we've come to in this country. At one time, Dallas had more attorneys, and now I'm sure it's a lot